touch with mamas and babies and parents in the most healthiest way possible that best suits you. So please, everyone, give me a round of applause for Dr. Elliot Berlin.
Hey everybody, you having a good time? Sort of a good time. You having a great time? All right, that's what the noise, I'm gonna make that noise when I win that Orbit Baby package right there. Thank you so much for coming to this event, Boobie Palooza. This is a part of the Informed Pregnancy Project that we developed a couple of years ago. Informed pregnancy, because there's so many choices and there's so much information swirling around there. And when you have a baby, it's really hard to sort through it and find the choices that make the most sense to you. And even if you do make your own decision, it's sometimes very hard to find support from practitioners for the choices that you've made. So the purpose here is to deliver information to you, help you make informed choices, and help you find support for those choices. Right now, for the next 30 minutes, we're going to focus on a topic that I bet a couple of you have talked about or thought about in the past month or so. Has anybody here, by a round of woohoo, been talking about vaccines lately? Okay, good. So there is so much passionate information. There's a little increase in number of cases of measles this year, and that increase in cases of measles has sent the debate about pro-vaccine versus anti-vaccine somewhat viral, to say the very least. And if you look, the voices you hear the loudest are the people who are absolutely sure that vaccines are all completely safe and necessary and effective, and the voices are absolutely sure that vaccines are dangerous and not necessary. And it's really hard to sort through the fact, the myth, the science, the pseudoscience. And me as a parent, and I bet all of you as parents as well, have one thing in common, which is that we're trying to do what's best for our kid. And it's hard to find the information and make sense out of it. So today, we're extremely pleased and honored to present somebody who has really spent probably more time than all of us collectively studying and researching vaccine pros and cons and safety, and even wrote the book about it, the vaccine book, which you'll be signing shortly in the back. I myself will be sitting in the audience listening very attentively, trying to get some more information as we continue to raise our children and make decisions. I'd like to please give some love and support to Dr. Bob Sears.
Hey guys, thanks. It's great to be here. Love the weather. Thank you for arranging that for me. I'm from Orange County, so we're usually running about 5 degrees warmer than you guys, but so this is really nice. I brought my wife and my 13-year-old up with me, and as soon as my 13-year-old walked in, he said, "Mom, can we get out of here?" He's a little bored, so he went to see Berkeley. Yeah, I'll talk louder. I'll talk in the microphone. Well, it's great to be here. I mean, this is such a huge issue, such a huge topic. It's such an important thing for parents to decide and understand. So I'm going to try to give you a half-hour version of what I think is most important, and the kids are welcome to be up here. It's certainly fine. I'm no stranger to that. Half-hour version of what you really should spend, weeks, many weeks reading and studying yourself. Okay, so after this, you really got to pour through the internet and research articles and books to really fully understand it. I'm going to try to get you on the road to understanding some of the key issues. But of course, we're going to talk about two things that are, one thing that shouldn't be in the news and one thing that is in the news, and I wish it wasn't. We're going to talk about measles, and we're going to talk about the SB 277, the new bill that was just submitted to eliminate your personal belief exemption from vaccines. So we're going to talk about those things. We're also going to talk about, is it safe to delay vaccines? Is it safe to go without vaccines completely? And if you make that choice, what are the implications of that choice? And when you vaccinate, is there a safer way to do it? Can you do it in a way that minimizes the side effects? How does a partial vaccination compare to full vaccination? I'm just going to try to go through all that. And then any of you who are pregnant, or just about to have babies, you have young babies, you're right there, currently in the midst of making this decision. I'm going to try to help you get started on what you can understand. As a pediatrician, I give vaccines in my office every day. And because I'm so understanding the patients, I'm one of the only pediatricians in Orange County that will take you if you don't vaccinate. So I get all those patients. And so consequently, through no doing of my own, it's about half of my patients are not vaccinated. So I've had a great opportunity to observe how these children do, getting older. Then, of course, when I do vaccines in my office, I do them a little more slowly and then spread out. So let's jump in. Let's talk. First of all, measles. I don't want to waste too much time on it, because honestly, it is a waste of time. Of all the dangerous, deadly, horrible diseases for the politicians to jump in on, I don't know why they picked measles, but it's probably the most politically incorrect disease to catch right now. So if you catch measles, stay hidden. Don't let anyone know, but if you do catch it and someone finds out, make sure you tell them you were vaccinated so it's not your fault, because they'll come down on you hard. No, I'm joking, but it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way, and I wish it wasn't that way. So real quick, measles, we're up to what, 149 cases, 141 cases, something like that. The thing with measles is when it hits, it spreads extremely slowly. It doesn't go through our whole country like wildfire, infecting everyone left and right. It's very, very slow. In Orange County, the outbreak is pretty much over. We had 90 cases down in Southern California. You guys have had like 5, 6, 7 cases in these 4 counties, something, 10 cases at the most, something like that. So measles spreads very slowly and then it dies out. Measles can never spread through a highly vaccinated society. The only place we'll see measles spread largely is if you have a whole bunch of people unvaccinated, like the Amish in Ohio, where we had 400 cases last year. And then a group in Texas, where very few people were vaccinated in a large church, we had over 100 cases there. So when you hear on the news there were 650 cases of measles last year, what they don't tell you is that most of those cases occurred in 2 select groups that were just outbreaks waiting to happen. For the rest of highly vaccinated America, measles last year was just the same as in any other year. Now this year it's been a little tough. We're seeing about 150 cases so far, but it's not going to turn into 300 next month and 600 the next month and 1,000 cases a few months from now. Measles just doesn't operate that way, fortunately. So I just want to try to bring down the hype and the hysteria. We got to deal with this, but don't go crazy over it. And there's so much going on in the world. There's terrorism, there's wars, there's hundreds of thousands of people dying from medication errors in the hospitals and infections they catch in the hospitals. Many, many tens of thousands of people die every year, and the news is only all about measles because there's a vaccine for it, and some people aren't getting the vaccine, therefore it's a political thing. So that's just my little soapbox. Can you do anything about measles if you catch it? Yes, you can, and I don't know why the news isn't talking about this. If you take, and this is according to the World Health Organization and the American Academy of Pediatrics endorses this also. It's in their brand new version of the Red Book. The AAP says, if you catch measles, take high doses of vitamin A for 2 days. And that lowers your risk of dying. It cuts the risk of dying in half, and it cuts the risk of complications in half. There is actually a treatment for measles that will reduce what could happen to you by half. No one talks about it because that's politically incorrect to suggest that there's a possible treatment for something that we'd rather you get a vaccine to prevent. And that really bothers me. But that's straight right there in the AAP and the World Health Organization's information. So if you're exposed to measles, I strongly encourage you to ask your doctor how to dose high doses of vitamin A for 2 days. Don't do it by yourself. It's very dangerous if you do it by yourself. If you take high doses of vitamin A for a few weeks, you'll get very sick. So you gotta follow the World Health Organization guidelines and get your doctor's advice on dosing for measles. So what do we do in the midst of this outbreak if you're not vaccinated? if you're not vaccinated and measles hits your school, you will be asked to stay home for 3 weeks, which I think is fair. You probably don't want to be in school where there's measles going around if your child's not vaccinated, because it's not really a disease you want to catch. Yeah, if you catch it, you're 99.9% likely you're going to be fine, but I don't know that anyone really wants to catch measles. I never encourage measles parties or personally catching it. So you would want to stay home from school, and the school's going to ask you to do that if you're not vaccinated, and I agree. If you have one measles vaccine, MMR vaccine, and you get that dose at 15 months or older, you have a 98% chance that that vaccine works. 98% chance likely that you're immune to measles with one dose at 15 months or older. If you get the dose at 12 months, like it's recommended, you only have a 95% likelihood that you're immune. So that's one reason I already delay it in my practice, so that people already go from 95% efficacy to 98% efficacy with simply a delay, because the baby's immune system responds better when they're older. But regardless of that, anytime you get one dose, 98% likelihood you're immune, and then you're good. Most people don't need the second dose. You will need a blood test to prove that that one dose worked, if you're going with a one-dose protocol. Your choice is either 2 MMRs, you're considered immune, or 1 MMR, and get a blood test a couple months later to verify that you're part of that 98% who is immune, and then no one can look at you funny, all right? Now, should you vaccinate in the midst of this outbreak if you had already chosen not to? Let me speak to that a little bit. Anyone who had already decided not to do an MMR because you weren't comfortable with it, should you run out and get vaccinated now? I would. Well, I'm not going to tell you personally what you should do, but I can say, because measles is so rare, and given how many people live in this 4 or 5 county area in the Bay Area, and you only have a couple handfuls of cases, is it likely that your child's going to catch measles? No. So now, if you feel some obligation to kind of take part in some of the public health measures, public health endeavors to try to prevent the spread, sure, go out and get a dose. Read the possible side effects, understand the pros and cons, and consider whether or not you're going to get a dose. But should you rush in to get one because measles is just coming down the street, infecting your neighbors left and right? No, you don't. You can calmly and make an educational decision about this. Okay, so I just want to calm everyone down. I can't tell you how many calls we got. We finally had to create a little email we'd send out, and when people call our office, my nurse can't spend a half hour with each patient on the phone, so we basically made this 3-page handout. We emailed everybody just to calm them down. About 100 people have come into my office this last month to get an MMR dose, and because they were concerned. But now we're faced, I'll talk a little bit about, now we're faced, you might actually not even be able to get into school in the first place if you don't get an MMR. We'll talk about that. But that's the thing with measles, you guys. The fatality rate is about 1 in 1,000 cases. Some outbreaks have created a higher fatality rate of 1 in 500 cases. Some outbreaks create a lower fatality rate. And again, you can reduce that risk with high-dose vitamin A. You just buy it online. You just search, vitamin A drops, high dose, measles dosing, that kind of thing. You'll find where to buy it. Okay, so enough about measles. Let me make sure I said everything important about measles. But I wish we didn't even have to talk about it. What's the wrong one? Sorry. Okay, measles. We should do. Okay, no, and I can answer your questions afterwards. Let me talk about the bill, you guys. It was just submitted, I think, on Thursday. Basically, in California, you could choose not to vaccinate with no consequences. Now the bill is going to take away the personal belief exemption. It was introduced in the Senate by 16 out of 40 senators. 16 out of 40 signed on to this bill already. And I'm pretty sure they said they only need a majority vote in the Senate to pass the bill. So already, if they only need 21 votes, already they're almost there in the Senate. Now only 10 out of 80 of the California Assemblymen signed on to the bill already, or co-authored the bill. Only 10 out of 80. So the assembly is where the fight's going to happen. That's where they need a lot more assemblymen and women to come on board before they can pass this bill. So get on the phone with the California Assembly members, the California senators, make your voices heard, join groups that are out there trying to put the word out and send in letters, make phone calls, drive up there. You got to do our part. Because if this passes, you know, I imagine if it passes, it won't be for maybe a whole nother year from now. And if it passes, it won't go into effect for maybe a whole nother year. So that's how these bills go. They tend to go pretty slowly. So nothing's going to happen tomorrow or next week or even next month. It's going to be a long fight. Right? But again, it's unfortunate that we even have to do it. I mean, I can't even imagine. We've just been living kind of thing with the luxury to make this decision freely, and now that's being taken away. Now, you might not know this, but no one can force you to vaccinate anybody. They can't force you to vaccinate. They're not going to mandate vaccines just, you know, if you have a child, you absolutely have to vaccinate. They're basically not going to allow you to register for school or daycare if you don't vaccinate. And that's what the bill is designed to do. And most private schools will probably follow suit. I imagine maybe some private school programs or some homeschool programs that you can register with will maybe allow you to opt out. So no one's actually going to sit there and take your baby and enforce vaccinations on them. They're going to do it, try to do it by default by taking away some of your rights to education, which is extremely unfortunate. But if you're already against vaccines and you feel very comfortable and strongly you don't want to vaccinate, don't worry, no one is actually going to physically make you do it. Because they just don't do that with any medical procedure at all, unless somebody's literally about to die right in front of you and you're declining like life-saving care or something, all right? That's kind of where we're at now. There is no religious exemption in California, and this bill says nothing about religion. So as it stands now, you won't be able to make any religious claims to get you out of vaccinations. If you're part of a religion that is very against vaccines, that won't cover you in California. It doesn't now, and it won't with this bill, because you didn't need a religious exemption before. You could just use your own personal belief exemption. So that's going to be a big fight as well. So let me tell you, the main reason why I oppose this bill is I believe parents have to have informed consent. Any medical treatment that has a risk, you're actually supposed to be explained to you what the risk is. Your doctor's supposed to give you something to read that says, here are all the possible side effects and here are the benefits, and you have the right as a parent to make that decision. And this bill won't take that right away. You'll just have to figure out how to educate your child if this bill passes. So that's why I oppose it. Informed consent, I think it's a sacred right in the medical community. The American Medical Association says everyone is entitled to informed consent. So that's why I would definitely say, as long as we live in a semi-free country, this will never be absolutely 100% forced upon you. So setting all that aside, what do we even do with this decision? Youth sitting there, young babies, what do you do? Okay, let me cover a few minutes on the idea of you have a new baby, what are you faced with, what's your decision look like? Okay, first of all, if you have a new baby, don't get a hepatitis B vaccine in the hospital the day your baby's born. And that's one of the few vaccines I'll actually physically say, don't do it while you're a baby. Hepatitis B is a sexually transmitted infection. You can also catch it through blood transfusion. American babies don't catch hepatitis B unless a mother is infected, unless a mother is a carrier. That happens is a huge problem in a lot of countries in Asia, where there's a very high rate of Hep B, and a lot of babies got Hep B transmitted through the birth process. It doesn't happen in America, and when it does, we know it. Anyone who gets prenatal care, you know you have Hep B, and you know you have to treat the baby at the time of birth. For everyone else who doesn't have Hep B, that baby has no risk of catching hepatitis B. So it's kind of your first decision is realize Hep B will be offered on the day your baby's born. If you refuse it, They'll look at you like you're crazy. They'll give you that stern, nurse or doctor look. I apologize on behalf of the medical community because they really have no basis to look at you that way. Yeah, if you were refusing a disease that your baby could catch the next day, yeah, they could look at you funny, but you're refusing a vaccine for a sexually transmitted infection. To say that, you just tell the nurse, well, my baby's not going to have sex yet, or my baby's not going to share any IV drug needles, and so I think my baby's covered. And then they'll kind of go off in a huff, just, because you're one of those parents. So Hep B is, I think, a very critical decision that I really encourage people to bypass that vaccine while babies are young. So you're next faced with the 2-month vaccines. That's really when the first round of vaccines come along. You're going to be offered 6 vaccines, 6 individual doses. One of those has 3 vaccines in them, so it's kind of like 8 vaccines total, but 6 different injections or oral doses of vaccines. 2 months, 4 months, and 6 months. I will say that I don't really like that process. I think that is an overload of vaccines. To compare this, back in the 80s, when we were all vaccinated, well, not some of you, but some of we, Elliot and me, and some of us, vaccinated back in the 80s, the 70s, 60s, I don't know. We had a total of 8 vaccines when we were kids. 8 vaccines throughout our whole childhood. Now, children get 54 individual doses of vaccines throughout their entire childhood. And it's something like, I forgot to add it up, something like 30-something by the time you're 3 or 4 or 5. I mean, there's a huge amount of vaccines now compared to before. So that's really the main reason I like to just slow it down. I spread them out, I do it more slowly, because I just feel like the safety research has not kept up with the expanding vaccine schedule. Now, I don't have time today to really go into a lot of detail on that. You really have to read about all these side effects. But as you're making this decision, if you're going to vaccinate, I like picking the most important vaccines that will protect a baby against the diseases that have the potential to be fatal to your baby, the diseases that can cause a big problem. And those diseases really are limited to the meningitis diseases, Hib and PC meningitis. Fortunately, they're not common. I think in my 17 years of pediatrics, I have not seen a case of either of these diseases. It doesn't mean they don't happen, they're just fortunately very common. But those 2 meningitises, those are things that can kill babies and can happen in the United States. So I do think those 2 vaccines are pretty important. I think the whooping cough vaccine is fairly important because whooping cough kills about 20 babies each year in the United States. And so I would group that in with one of the important vaccines. But for me, that's about it. I mean, the rotavirus vaccine, that disease it used to kill about 50 babies each year in the United States. It's an oral vaccine, so it's not an injection, so it's given in a more natural route. So rotavirus is pretty important, but if you want to limit your vaccines to only the things that could potentially be fatal for a baby, you're really looking at those 4, and you can get them staggered. 1 at a time, 2 at a time, instead of all 4 at a time. The flu can kill a baby as well. The flu kills about 100 children each year in the United States, and that is a vaccine that you could argue has a potential to prevent a possible fatal infection for a baby. However, the flu vaccine doesn't work very well at all. It's extremely ineffective in babies. It doesn't nearly have the efficacy that those other 4 I mentioned have. So I don't really group the flu vaccine into my important list just because it doesn't buy you very much protection while you're a baby. So that's kind of partly what my book is about, is if you're going to vaccinate, how do you do it carefully and slowly and pick and choose the most important ones? I think you can safely delay vaccines. Let me speak to a little bit to the families in the crowd who prefer not to vaccinate or think of delaying vaccines. In my 17 years of pediatrics so far, in a group of where half my patients aren't vaccinated at all, I'd say I have never seen one single dangerous case of any of these diseases. I've never seen a dangerous case of whooping cough or the flu or meningitis or rotavirus. And when I say dangerous, I mean where the child almost died, they had to go to the intensive care unit, they needed an ambulance to rush them to the ER and give them, life-saving medical care, where they were very seriously ill. Fortunately, I've been so fortunate that none of my patients have had a very severe case of any of these diseases. So when I'm faced with families that tell me they don't want to vaccinate, and then I explain to them what the risks of the diseases are, and they still tell me I don't want to vaccinate, I tell them, okay, it might not be good for the public health, and you might want to keep this decision to yourself, unfortunately, in today's hour. Get out there and be very vocal about it and stand up for yourself, whatever you want to do. But I tell them, in my experience, I think that's a reasonably safe decision, because so far I've not had any families in my office regret such a decision. Could it happen? Yes. Unfortunately, maybe one of the babies in my practice who doesn't vaccinate could catch meningitis and pass away. Could someone die of measles? No one's died of measles in at least the last 15 years in the United States. About 25 years ago, when we had a big outbreak, we had about 100 people die of measles in the U.S. So is somebody going to die of measles coming up in the years to come? Probably. We probably will have a fatality in our country. It's going to be very sad. It's going to be a big problem. But I tell again my families, this hasn't happened in my office in 17 years, and I have this huge group of unvaccinated families. So I feel like statistically it's reasonably safe if you want to put things off if you're not comfortable with vaccinating yet. I never tell anyone to do that, but this is more me accepting them as a patient and saying, okay, we'll work with you, and I'll be your doctor, and I'm hoping that my good statistic will stand and stay with us. So that's, again, families that are faced or prefer not to vaccinate. If you want to delay vaccines, say you just don't want to vaccinate with your baby when they're young, you just don't feel good about it, but you do want to vaccinate when your baby's older, you can do that. If you don't put your baby in any sort of group daycare, if you don't put your baby in a church nursery, if you don't take your baby to a big, huge, parenting expo where there's lots of babies and no, you can safely go out in public. You can go outside, go to the park, go to the store. I think you should live life with a baby if you're not vaccinated. My only precaution is don't leave your baby in a nursery or childcare situation where there's lots of other babies crawling around and everyone's sharing germs, because that's where the disease risk happens for young babies. But if you want to delay otherwise, you can start vaccines when your kid gets a little older, when they're 2 or 3 or 4. And I think this is what a lot of you might be faced with. If the bill passes and you cannot attend school without vaccines, and you choose you do want to attend school, let me tell you a little bit of good news. I told you there were 54 doses that were mandated for children throughout their whole childhood, 0 through 18. Well, in order to meet the school requirements, you guys, what they're looking at is probably a total of 13 vaccines that will be required. Because if you don't vaccinate when the baby's young and you wait till the baby's a little older, you need fewer doses. There are 2 shots where you need 4 each, so that's 8 total. You only need 1 of each. There's a shot that you need 5, and if you wait till your baby's older, you only need 4. There's a shot where you need 4, you only need 3. There's 2 shots where you need 2 doses, you only need 1 of each. It's too hard to detail that now, but the good news is it's not a huge overload of vaccines if you're going to meet school requirements with a 5-year-old. You might have to miss preschool, pre-kindergarten, but by the time, you can start vaccinating when your baby's like 2 or 3, slowly work in those 13 vaccines by the time your baby's 5, ready for kindergarten, if you're ever really forced into that decision. So I think we're not going to be overloaded. No one's ever going to hit you with that many, okay? And again, my book makes that very clear how to do that, and as that decision moves forward, I will definitely write about that and make that very clear, make it very easy information for people to access online on a website if you're faced with that. So I will help provide a lot of guidance through this if we're faced with this. Can you safely travel without vaccines? I say yes. If you choose not to vaccinate, I think you can go anywhere in the world that a tourist would go. Yeah, your baby might catch something, but the risk is almost no different than your day-to-day life here. So feel free to vacation and travel anywhere in the world, regardless of your vaccine status, because it's pretty safe. I just like to throw that out there. Let me touch real quick. There's some argument about whether or not vaccines work. And I know some people really firmly believe vaccines don't work, or that there isn't evidence that they do work. I do believe they work. I firmly believe vaccines work. I feel like they work very well. Some of them work 99%. Some of them only work about 80%. But I do believe they give you the protection that they're designed to give you, and that they do work. If they didn't work, I don't think we wouldn't be seeing chickenpox going away. We wouldn't have seen measles virtually go away, because measles and chickenpox have nothing to do with how poor or rich you are, or how clean or dirty you are. Everyone used to catch chickenpox, and now it's hard to find. Everyone used to catch measles, and now it's really hard to find. And I think, even polio. Yeah, the fatality rate of polio was going way down before the vaccine, but the disease was not going down before the vaccine came out. And whenever you look at a chart where someone's trying to demonstrate to you that the disease was going away before a vaccine was introduced, those charts usually involve fatalities from disease. They'll say fatalities from measles was way down, fatalities from polio was way down, way before the vaccine came in. But if you look at charts that show the actual disease numbers themselves, you'll always see a sharp fall as soon as a vaccine was introduced in our society. And for me, that's the biggest argument that's demonstrated that vaccines work, and they work very well. I just want to throw that out there. You could argue that for a long time. But, so moving forward, I definitely want to take some time for questions. We got to do this with a lot of love, but we got to be loud. We can't be angry and yell at people. You know, if you're very for vaccines, you're very pro-vaccine, you tend to just yell at everyone who doesn't want to vaccinate. And if you're anti-vaccine, you hate vaccines, you tend to yell at people who do want to vaccinate. And you're probably right to yell if they're trying to force you to vaccinate. You should get mad about it. But this has to be done in love and with calm and peace. And we got to get to our legislatures, got to be loud but respectful about this. And so get out there and make your voice heard. And so I think I'll stop trying to share what I see as some of the most salient issues that you need to think about. And there's never a single talk that can give you anything you need to know. So you definitely got to read a lot of good information online. And I think we can take a bunch of questions.
Thank you so much. I know you guys have questions.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
That was my half hour.
I know you guys have questions. I have a lot of questions about what you just said as well. I want to introduce one other person. One thing I love about you is that you're not just academic. You are an academic, but not just an academic, but a practicing pediatrician. And you live and practice what you preach. We also have Dr. Jolene Brighton, who is a naturopathic doctor here in Oakland. She has a family practice, and she's able to sort of bridge the gap between conventional and complementary medicine. And together, Dr. Sears and Dr. Brighton will be answering your questions. Some of your questions. And then afterwards, they'll be available just behind here in the book nook, where Dr. Sears will also be signing books. All right, all right, first hand right up over there. This is my exercise for the month.
Dr. Sears, are your patients able to get pertussis vaccine without having the 3 or tetanus? Can one get a tetanus shot without having 3 of them snuck in on you?
Yeah, you can get a plain tetanus shot. They're not hard. They're not easy to find, but you can still get a plain tetanus. You can't get plain pertussis, and you cannot get plain measles. You can only get those as the full MMR, or pertussis as the full DTP. But yes, you can get plain tetanus. Tetanus, fortunately, we only have about 5 cases in our whole country every year among children 0 to 18. So tetanus is an extremely rare disease. So it's not one that I strongly encourage people to get vaccinated against if their preference was to not vaccinate. But yes, you can. When we have people shout, just call out your questions and I'll repeat them. Yeah. Yeah, political organizations. I mean, I think the primary one is the NVIC, National Vaccine Information Center. They've been fighting this nationwide, nvic.org. They probably have some of the best political arguments, and they helped shoot this down in some other states, in recent years. And so, yeah, they're a good organization. Any other political organizations that you know of? Yeah, that is definitely the main one. And if I hear of others, I'll be putting that out on my Facebook. Yeah, thanks. Yes. Do I what? Okay. Is the MMR worth getting? Yeah, that's a half-hour answer overall. I would say it kind of boils down to if you're comfortable with vaccines, you've read all the possible side effects and the safety research, and you're comfortable with vaccinating, I certainly think you can get an MMR. I give it in my office. I've given it to about 100 of my patients in the last month. 2 of them have regretted the decision. Nothing dangerous has happened to them, but one of them suffered a measles-like illness for about a week, very sick and feverish and rashy. Another one got a lot of weakness and kind of a chronic fatigue for a few weeks. The other 98 seemed just fine. I haven't seen anything bad happen among them. So if you have read, you have to read about all the pros and cons, and you understand all the issues. I certainly think you can get the vaccine reasonably safely. That's why I give it in my office, but I make sure everyone has informed consent. But again, like I said, if you are not comfortable with the possible side effects of MMR, especially while your baby's young, thank God measles is extremely rare. This disease, this outbreak is going away, as it always does. We'll have another outbreak later this year or next year, but it's not rampaging everywhere. And I think you can safely raise a baby without an MMR vaccine, given that we barely see the disease.
Dr. Brighton, a quick question. A lot of times,
I just wanted to add with that. I think that's very good information. But as a parent and as a mother, you also have to, weigh in on how you're going to feel if you don't vaccinate. And I have patients who don't vaccinate, but the parents don't sleep every night, and they're on panic and they're anxious all the time because they feel like, well, maybe I made a wrong decision, and what if my child gets this, and what if my child gets that? I think that's something worth considering. And while maybe this shouldn't be a really large consideration, parents should be aware that if their child's unvaccinated, so with measles right now, your child doesn't have a vaccine, if there is a measles case in your school, that's 21 days. 21 days your child can't attend school or daycare, and families really have to think, especially, if you have 2 working parents, how is that going to impact your family? And if you have to, can you take 21 days off of work, and, what will that look like? If you've got family and you've got friends that you can rely on, that's wonderful, but this is especially important if you're a single parent. You have to make that consideration as well in vaccinating.
Do patients who come to naturopathic doctors, are they always anti-vaccine? What are you finding in your practice?
No, I would say that the majority of patients, they just want information. They want knowledge. I think why I love working with parents is because they're super savvy and they want to research and they want to know everything that's best for their children. I think that it's generally the thought is that naturopathic doctors are anti-vaccine, and we're not. We're pro-individual medicine. We're pro-individual choice, and we want to make sure that you are making the best decision for your child. And like Dr. Sears was saying, it's all about informed consent, that you are making your choices and you're well educated about that. But yeah, I would say, majority of patients, they're looking for knowledge, but what I also offer that's different is that if your child does contract something, like Dr. Sears was talking about measles and vitamin A, I've got a whole toolkit full of things to help patients navigate through that and to treat their children with a cough, if a fever comes up, those kinds of symptoms.
How accessible are vaccines without preservatives? If so, what are the lifespan of those vaccines? Vaccines without preservatives exist?
Yeah, in fact, most vaccines now probably don't have preservatives because they're in single dose vials. So you don't have to get any vaccines with mercury anymore, except the flu shot. About half the flu shots that are made are still made with a mercury preservative, but half the flu shots are made without mercury preservative. And virtually all vaccines, they don't need any preservatives because they're in single doses. There's certainly a lot of chemicals. Now, if you meant to say the word chemicals instead of preservatives, oh yeah, there's a whole host of chemicals in vaccines that you have to read about and understand. Probably the primary reason I spread vaccines out in my practice is because of aluminum in vaccines. And we know aluminum's a neurotoxin, and the medical community is hoping that we're not giving too much when we give all the vaccines. But I would argue that we are giving too much aluminum. So that's probably the one chemical I like to be careful with and spread out. And my writing makes it very clear how to spread that out as best you can. But there are a lot of chemicals that are in very tiny quantities that you sort of have to read and understand. That's part of the informed consent process, in my opinion. So it's not about preservatives. You'll ask your doctor, could I have a preservative-free vaccine? Your doctor's like, sure. All my vaccines don't have preservatives, because they don't. Because they only consider mercury probably as the only preservative. Yeah.
As far as if you don't want to vaccinate, you want your kids to go to school, is that you're going to have to just homeschool, or is there going to be schools out there that will let you go and not vaccinate?
Yeah. As of now, you can go to school, but if this bill passes, you will not be able to attend public school. I would imagine there'll be some private schools that will open up, but then a private school where no one's vaccinated, that's an outbreak waiting to happen, unfortunately. I think those families sign up for that risk, to live as a community with some risk involved. But yeah, will you homeschool? I don't know, but I can definitely say you won't be forced into it, physically forced into it, but I don't know, so stay tuned. If you're going to delay vaccines but then try to do them in order to get into school, I would think you'd probably start into vaccines around age 2 or 3 to slowly get in those 13 or so vaccines over a 3-4 year process. You don't want to do it too quickly. So you got to be real careful, and I'll put out there. I'll write about that on my website or Facebook.
I see three more questions that we're going to take here, and then I have one question. If it doesn't come up, I'm going to ask you as well.
Well, the question is if you have a lot of autoimmune problems in your family, gluten allergies, dairy allergies, all that stuff, if there's a lot of autoimmunity in your family, a few vaccines are a little riskier for you. MMR vaccine has a lot of autoimmune side effects. Hepatitis B vaccine has a lot of autoimmune side effects. Chickenpox vaccine, somewhat. So I think you'd be more careful with those vaccines. Maybe the flu vaccine would be some risk with autoimmunity. I'm not saying you shouldn't get those vaccines, but any of those vaccines would be riskier for someone with a lot of autoimmunity in your family. Let me throw out one problem with MMR that we see is women who have gone through puberty and get an MMR vaccine when they're older, there's a very high rate of chronic rheumatoid arthritis. Very risky to grown-up women, post-pubertal women. The risk is, we know between 12 and 26% of teen and adult women who get an MMR vaccine will suffer a severe arthritis reaction. And then a certain percentage of those, maybe a small percentage, will develop lifelong chronic rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know if it's about 1% or 2% or 5% of adult women who get an MMR. If you're a child getting an MMR, you don't have that same risk. So it's really interesting, maybe this isn't a great thing for this talk, but there is a safer time to get an MMR vaccine. It's when you have like a child before puberty, all right? Once you're through puberty, the MMR becomes very risky for adult women. specifically. So I have a lot of families in my practice getting it now with their 5 to 10-year-olds simply because of that issue. They don't want to ever be forced into it when their kid's older. Unfortunately, that kind of forces you into it now. So it's a whole dilemma, and I do write about that in the book as well, more extensively. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that is a great point to bring up. And you're talking about the perfect cocktail for autoimmunity. You have leaky gut, you've developed food sensitivities, and especially in a child early on, that can be problematic. And then you already have the genetic material, the makeup, that predisposes you to it. And what the vaccine really is the environmental impact. It's what's coming in through the environment. So it could be the vaccine, it can also be just, riding your bike and breathing, car exhaust that's coming into the system, and you're not good at eliminating, and your immune system is already ready to fire off. So, I think you hit on a really good point with the food sensitivities and the family history of autoimmunity, and there's lots of ways that you can really start to affect how your genes are going to react to these things, making sure that baby's good at eliminating waste, and also that you're employing things to balance the immune system, like having good omega-3 fatty acids in the diet and ample vitamin D. Oh, you just hit the nail on the head, and that's beautifully said. And she was saying having parents regulate their own autoimmunity before baby's born. Of course, that's the ideal. We want to make this perfect little being. That's everyone's goal, and I see lots of beautiful babies out here today. But, where that really starts, that starts with mom and dad.
Can you touch on the topic of shedding and the live vaccines?
Yeah, shedding, if you get vaccines, can you spread the virus to other people? I would actually say it's almost a problem that you almost shouldn't have to worry about. The only exceptions are people who get an MMR vaccine will shed the rubella virus for a few weeks. And so it's actually recommended if a mom is pregnant and has no rubella immunity, she really shouldn't give any of her children an MMR vaccine during one of her pregnancies. Rubella is really the only key there. The rotavirus vaccine babies get, that sheds for a few weeks. The nasal flu vaccine that you get, that sheds for a few weeks. The doctors have studied this a lot, and they don't see anyone ever actually get sick from these shed viruses. They just show that you picked it up and it's in your system, but you wouldn't actually feel sick or get sick in any way that we would know from symptoms. So overall, other than make sure you don't get an MMR in one of your own children if you yourself are pregnant and don't have rubella immunity, that's really the only place I say shedding matters. And I don't think it's something we have to live in fear of or keep our unvaccinated child away from someone who was just vaccinated, because I don't think your child's going to experience any harm from such shedding overall.
So my question is, you're speaking to the rarity of some of these viruses.
Going towards you, and the sound's coming out over here.
So you're speaking towards the rarity of some of these viruses in our society. And so is that not due to the vaccinations that we've been given for a while now? I mean, if we stop that.
Yeah. I definitely give all the applause or whatever, to vaccines. I firmly believe the reason why we're so disease-free is that I think vaccines have played that major role in eliminating or limiting these diseases. Absolutely, you're right. So you kind of have to decide as a parent, do you have some social responsibility to take part in the vaccination process, and to help that immunity? I feel like that is part of the argument, and that's what each parent would need to decide. I don't think it's enough where we should say everyone is forced to do it, because you are going to have bad vaccine reactions. And this was supposed to be part of my talk, but we have 2,000 severe vaccine reactions reported to the Centers for Disease Control every year. And that's CDC data, that's not my data. 2,000 severe reactions where someone ends up in a prolonged hospitalization, a permanent disability, or a death from a vaccine reaction. Now, these are only reported. None of these are actually proven to be from the vaccine. Now, most vaccine reactions are not reported. The 2,000 a year is only what's reported. That's probably estimates about 10% of all the severe reactions that are reported. So if you balance the underreporting with the fact that maybe a lot of those reactions aren't even from the vaccines, it probably balances out somewhere. We probably could say there are a couple thousand severe vaccine reactions every year. Because of that, we can't force these on anybody, nor should anyone feel obligated to do it unless they're comfortable. And the government has paid out now over $3 billion in damages to victims of vaccine injury. If you just Google search vaccine injury compensation $3 billion, you'll see the government's website that details. And I don't think they're paying $3 billion to people who are faking vaccine reactions or having pretend vaccine reactions. So I think you have to understand all this, but absolutely, I think it's vaccines are the primary factor that have gotten us to where we are today. Yeah, I've seen a few bad reactions in my practice, not many, but yeah, probably severe vaccine reactions, probably a handful over all these years, so not a lot.
The bad news is we're out of time on this session, but the good news is I know you're available online. You have a forum, which is at, where can we find you online?
Oh, well, Dr. Bob Sears Facebook. That's my main place. Dr. Bob Sears on Facebook.
Yeah, so I have my website, which is drbrighton.com, and then I'm also on social media, most notably Facebook at Dr. Brighton.
Beautiful, and there are so many more questions. There's only so much you can do in an hour, and this is not an easy conversation. What I take out of this as a parent of 4 kids is, it's not super black and white. Yeah. There's some homework to do. There's pros and cons to vaccinating, pros and cons to not vaccinating. There's personal issues to consider and social issues and for the rest of society to take into account. And one place I know where there's a lot more answers is in your book. So I've read some of it.
Yeah.
There's so much information there, and it's fantastic that it's all compiled in one place.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to answer questions one-on-one, after this. And there's probably a book signing, table somewhere. Definitely ask me your questions if you have a question about your situation regarding vaccines. Probably only vaccines mainly, but ask me any question you want if you want.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here. And, right upstairs in the womb right now at 3:30, there's